The following video produced by Regent Park TV contains information about the research and findings of a report conducted by the SDP Employment and Economic Development Committee. Part 1 of this video features an interview with the research lead Ayesha Amin related to how information was gathered. Part 2 of this video features Ayesha's presentation of the findings. Part 3 of this video features the final report itself for your own review. Hope you enjoy this.
Hi, Aisha. Thank you for joining us at RPTV and talking about the report you presented in the EED meeting. Can you introduce yourself and tell us about your role at the Employment and Economic Working Table?
Sure. So my name is Aisha. I have been part of the Employment and Economic Development Group, which we'll call the EED, um, since about late summer last year. So I was brought on because I have a background in community development, and I was asked to support with collecting data for a community needs assessment to really try and understand and paint a picture of what the current needs with regards to employment and entrepreneurship are within Regent Park. So that way, the EED as a group can then formulate a strategy moving forward. So I'm a sort of on and off again resident of Regent Park over the last several years. I've also been a volunteer. I've worked there, so I've been part of the community on and off for about the last decade.
Recently, in the previous EED meeting, you presented a report. Could you tell us what is the report all about?
Yeah, sure. So the report is basically all the data that's been collected over the last 8 or so months, primarily by me, with residents and with agencies and entrepreneurs and different businesses across the area. So the data basically combines information that's been collected through an online survey in which we had nearly 400 residents respond. And then on top of that, there were interviews that I conducted with 29 residents as well as 13 agency staff, not just employment agencies, but generally agencies across the community. And so the data in the presentation, which is available to anybody who wants to see it, comes from this report. And this report basically brings together all of that information that's been collected. It's anonymized. And then recommendations and suggestions from the community have also been shared. And that is to really, again, give us a very up to date picture in terms of what's working, what assets and resources we have in the community with regards to employment and entrepreneurship, and what needs do residents as well as agency staff say they have still, and where is that gap? And that's what we need to address. So that report and that presentation is just bringing together all of that data in a succinct way that is easy to understand and that is accessible.
Okay, that's wonderful to know. And what are the outcomes of the report, and do you know how it will benefit Regent Park community?
Yeah, so I guess the outcomes, I mean, as I say, so currently the outcomes are that this data is supposed to just show community members and, of course, the EED and the Social Development Plan, the SDP, which it sits under. It's supposed we need the information to be able to come up with a strategy. So this is that information. It was a lot of people who responded. We know it's not going to be 100% of community members, of course, but we got a pretty good picture, and we wanted to, without that information, you're just kind of starting without collaborating with the community, right? And so the outcome is going to be that the EED now have some data, some information from where to start. What's happening is they're hiring a coordinator who is going to work with the working group to come up with a strategy. And this data is going to inform that strategy. So this works as a sort of starting point. Now we know what the community is saying that they still need. Here are their suggestions. How can we now, as a group, come up with a strategy to move it forward? So the outcome is hopefully going to be that we manage to address the remaining gaps that have been identified within the community with regards to employment and entrepreneurship.
What will be done with the findings?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say exactly what I just said, which was that this is going to be responded to in a strategy that is formulated by the coordinator, who is currently in the process of the hiring is currently ongoing within the community. And that coordinator will work with the EED members to determine how to address the identified needs that have been brought up within the findings of the report. So um, it remains to be seen. Right now, all I know is that a strategy, we needed this information to for this person to be able to create a strategy and actually respond to, because we don't know what we're responding to if we don't have the data. And then there's been a
Absolutely.
lot of suggestions, as you will have seen in the presentation and in the report, a lot of suggestions that community members had suggested in terms of what they would like to see, how they feel their needs could be addressed. And so that can be a starting point where they can figure out the coordinator and the EED can figure out, okay, here's what community members are telling us they want. Here's what they're telling us they need. Let's
Yes.
see how we can actually do this.
Okay, brilliant, brilliant. Can you talk about the sources of this research?
Well, I mean, so it was all done through interviews and focus groups and an online survey, as I mentioned earlier. So we had 396 people who responded to the online survey. And that was between that was between December and end of January to early February. It was online. And then on top of that, we had people who had expressed interest either through the survey itself or through contacting us or through um, word of mouth, through emails. We had put it out through the TCHC newsletter. We had put it out on social media. We put it out through posters across the community. So through various methods, we'd asked the agencies to share it amongst their networks. So through various methods, we had people who expressed interest in after that in participating in a one-on-one interview with me or in a focus group of up to 4 people with me as well. And I collected all that data. We had questions. The questions were developed and then collaborated on with input from already over 40 people within the community members. So it really was a collaborative process to ensure that we found that balance between making sure that we get data that would really be helpful, but also making sure that it wasn't just top down, that we really worked with community members to ensure that everybody had a voice, um, and that we were really responding to what many people wanted to know, not just those of us who came up with the questions. And so that was done, and then I conducted them. There was a lot of work put into it, a lot of hours analyzing it, making sure it was anonymous, and then actually putting the report together. So it's taken a few months, but I think we have a really good report now and some good data to start this work. And then the only part of the report that is not through community needs assessment or through actually talking to community members was the labor market trends. So we thought it would be important to include um, a little section about what the current employment trends are across Toronto, Ontario, and Canada to really give a sense of what the broader picture is. Because without that, we can't really situate our neighborhood. So that is where we can sort of start with the groundwork to understand Regent Park as it relates to the rest of the city, province, and country to really be able to compare and understand where it fits. And then there's also a section in the labor market trends report on employment trends and what some of the sectors are that we expect are that are forecasted to be sectors that are going to grow. So that can, and all of that data was collected through government sources and through the most recent census, which was in 2016. So some of that Regent Park data might not be fully accurate, but as much up to date as is currently available. And then there was the asset map, which is a section of the report that is editable. And so the EED and the coordinator have the ability to update the map as well as the repository. And community members and agencies, as information around the resources in the community develop or change, that can be edited to make sure that it's kept up to date. And that was compiled by myself through a process of online research, interviews, emails, phone calls to agencies, walking around the community, a whole bunch of different things to really make sure we tried to capture as many of the employment and entrepreneurial assets or resources available as possible. And there may be some that are missing. And that's where the community can email or let us know, hey, there's this new, you know, there's this new training opportunity related to employment that you don't know about. So it's really about being able to continue to update it so that way it is usable beyond 3 to 6 to 9 to 10 months, right? Because as we know, things are constantly changing right now. So when it comes to addresses, when it comes to what's available from these services, we want to make sure, or what businesses are offering, we want to make sure that that continues to be updated. So it was a combination of those ways of collecting that data. And of course, it's been shared widely with community members. So edits have also already been made to make sure that if somebody saw something that's missing or needs edited, that's been done. So it's really been collected through a variety of ways.
Anything else you would like to say or any message for the community?
No, just to say that, the group is trying to respond to the needs. And I really want to thank everybody who has given their time in order for us to be able to collect this data. There's been a lot of people who have taken time to talk to me, to share with me, to trust me, trust that I would keep what they said anonymous before sharing it, and really trust that there's a process here, and that this is information that is going to somewhere. It's not going to be change. We're not going to see change overnight, but this information is going to then be responded to by this group. And I've tried to really be very transparent with some of the responses, including some that might be a little bit controversial, because I want to make sure that the voices of the people that I spoke to are heard. And so I just want to say thank you to everybody who took the time out. Thank you to everybody who shared the survey, who shared the interviews with people, who have participated in the process in any way from start to finish. Thank you. And I hope that what goes forward, now that we are hiring a coordinator to take this forward, hopefully there will be some movement on this, and that we'll be able to actually address these needs.
Thank you so much, Aisha. Thank you for all the hard work and effort you put in making this report, which can eventually benefit Regent Park. And thank you for telling us about this on RPTV.
Thanks for having me. So this research was done to better understand what current resources are available to residents with regards to employment and entrepreneurship. So it also includes the ongoing needs that remain to be addressed. And the data from this report will then inform the strategy of this working group, the EED, moving forward, along with its sort of around its objective to increase sustainable employment rates and entrepreneurial opportunities for the residents of Regent Park. So this is our sort of agenda. So the presentation and the accompanying data is broken into 4 sections. First, we've got the labor market trends, followed by the asset map. Then the bulk of the data, which is going to be the needs assessment. And finally, suggestions that are provided by the community on what they would like to see in the neighborhood to address the ongoing needs. Okay, so first we're going to start with the labor market trends. So this gives a broad overview of some of the market trends across Toronto, Ontario, and Canada. And this acts as a starting point so that we can better sort of situate Regent Park within the larger context of employment across the city, across the province, and across the country. So we'll be using two terms in the next couple of slides. The first one is employment rate. That is defined as the percentage of people who are legally able to work and who are employed, and the unemployment rate, which is the opposite. Anybody who is above 15 years old, who is legally able to work and who would like to work but is not working. So we'll start with pre-pandemic rates. So this is, again, a very broad overview to sort of understand the context within which we find ourselves in from an employment standpoint. So prior to the pandemic, the labor market across Canada, across Ontario, and across Toronto were all very strong. Unemployment rates were down and they were consistently falling. Across Canada, the 5 years leading up to 2020, the employment rates grew year over year. Unemployment was at 5.6% in February 2020, and that had been again going down consistently. It was at 7% in 2016. I know percentages sound a bit small, but as for employment, this is quite a significant percentage. On the Ontario level, the labor market was also strong. So the unemployment rate in both 2018 and 2019, the years before the pandemic, were at 5.6%, and that had been the lowest that that unemployment rates had been since 1989. 2020 also started out strong in Ontario, with 62% of Ontarians who could work that were employed. At a Toronto level, the unemployment rate was also steadily decreasing for many years. So it was at 7.4% in February 2015, and by February 2020, it was down to 5.4%. And so this is really important. Something that's really important to note is that despite the decreases in unemployment across the city, even prior to the pandemic, 1 in 5 Torontonians were considered to be living in poverty even before the pandemic. And this number was disproportionately represented by Indigenous, Black, and racialized Torontonians, as well as youth, new immigrants, and people with disabilities and vulnerable seniors. Thank you. So 2020 to 2021, where we find ourselves now. So obviously, we all know the pandemic-related restrictions came into effect in March of 2020, and this, of course, has had an impact on employment rates across the province, the city, the country. So Canada-wide, in 2020, the unemployment rate rose. It hit a peak in May of last year, and it was the highest it had been ever in recorded history, at 13.7% across Canada. By the end of last year, the unemployment rate did decrease, but it was still at 8.6%. And 2021, this year, started out similarly quite high, with unemployment at 9.4% in January and 8.1% in April, which is the most recent data available. So it's still considered to be relatively high. At the Ontario level, in the months leading up to the pandemic, as mentioned before, 62% of Ontarians were working. 82% of Ontarians who were working full time. By March, the employment rate dropped down to 58%. And out of the 402,800 jobs that were lost in March alone across Canada, 40% of those were in Ontario. Obviously, that's because, it's the largest province, it's the most populated province, and also many of the sectors that were most impacted by restrictions had their major bases in Ontario, so retail, tourism, entertainment. By the end of last year, 239,100 Ontarians, so nearly 250,000 Ontarians, had been what's considered to be long-term unemployed, which means not working for at least 27 weeks consecutively. And this was 3.4 times the pre-pandemic numbers, so significant. And then, of course, the most recent data, April 2021, the unemployment in Ontario was still relatively high at 11.3%. So of the people that have been most impacted by pandemic-related job losses in Ontario, the demographics most impacted include youth, immigrants, people with a high school diploma or a post-secondary diploma or certificate, but not people with a degree, um, and people who are considered to be low-waged workers. Finally, at the Toronto level, the rate of unemployment was 5.4% in February 2020, right before the pandemic. And by the end of 2020, it was all the way up to 10.7%. And January actually started out even higher at 11.8%. Most recent data in April of 2021, it was at 13.1%. So really, really high rates of unemployment across Canada, Ontario, and of course, Toronto throughout the last year and a bit. However, as vaccine rollouts and ongoing restrictions start to ease, it is widely expected by experts across the field that the rate of unemployment across the city, the province, and the country will decrease again. It is expected that there will be relatively stable rates of employment once the pandemic is over. But of course, everything remains to be seen how quickly this will happen and how quickly the employment rates will bounce back, as it's, of course, dependent on the pandemic staying under control. Okay, so we're going to shift gears slightly. We're going to look at sort of the future. Okay, so we decided one part that was really, really important to look at from an employment sector standpoint, labor sector standpoint, was looking at forecast. What sectors are expected to grow in the medium to long term? So this is important because it's important for people who want to upskill or who are just deciding what careers they want to go into, to have an idea of what is forecasted to grow and where skills are going to be in demand, and which jobs. So these are the sectors that are widely expected to grow in the next 5, 10, and 20 years, across the city, the province, and the country. So I'm not going to read every single job, but you can see in each of the colors, there is each sector that is expected to grow. So we've got technology, healthcare, finance, renewable energy, and the trades. And then those are the jobs that are listed. Again, you can look at this in detail in the PDF or in the report as it comes. These are the actual roles within those sectors that are projected to have many vacancies in the coming years. So yes, so a limitation around Regent Park demographics. This is just to bring this, contextualize all of this within a region, contextualize Regent Park from around the city, and sort of ground what we are learning about employment trends in a Regent Park context. So one thing again to note, thank you for bringing that up, is that this data, the Regent Park demographics only, these are from the 2016 census. This is the most recent data that's available around demographics, as you know, so it may not be totally up to date, but it is the most recent data available. Obviously, the 2021 census, the data will come out next year. So there is also no employment-specific data available about Regent Park. So while we have census data that gives us a little bit of information around income and around demographics, we don't have Regent Park specific data like we do on a Toronto, Ontario, and Canada level. So Regent Park, of course, we all know, is one of the most diverse communities across the country. 70% of the neighborhood identify as a visible minority. Comparing that across the city of the whole of Toronto, which is, of course, the most multicultural city in the world, the rate across the city is only 51.5%, compared, of course, with Regent Park, which is 70%. So regarding income, the median income for families in Regent Park was 52,506. And again, comparing this to across Toronto, where it's 82,859. Obviously, we can see there's a big divide. So residents that are considered to be, according to measurements by the Canadian government, living in poverty. Again, this is not even considering the pandemic. In Regent Park, it was 44.4% of residents versus 21.9% across the city. So again, this gives us just a very, very quick snapshot of the demographics in the community as it relates to income and to disparity. And there are much more details around this as they relate to sort of the relevant demographics around employment and income in the report. Okay, so we're going to shift gears now to the next section, which is the asset map. So we kind of developed what we thought would be a useful way to show the community what assets or resources are available. It consists of two elements. So we have a repository and there's a corresponding map. So these two items work together to give the community an accessible list, as well as a visual of what resources are available for employment and entrepreneurial opportunities and support. So we decided that the best way to go about this was to categorize the assets or the resources into four main categories. The first category is employability, and we define that as employment agencies or training that is related to employment and becoming employed or improving one's employment outcomes. The next category is community employers, and that refers to businesses or agencies that prioritize residents for jobs. Then the next category is work experience, and that refers to opportunities to get experience, so internships, apprenticeships, summer jobs, anything that is based around actually giving that experience to build your resume. And finally, the last category is entrepreneurship, and that has opportunities and supports for entrepreneurs, so funding opportunities, other kinds of sort of training or anything related to entrepreneurship. See, this is again available to the community, and because we know that things change, especially these days, we know that there are businesses that may be changing their services, they might be moving. So both the repository and the map, the visual, can be edited. So we decided to keep them virtual because that way the information can be kept up to date. Both components will be accessible by the EED, by the co-chairs, and by the coordinator who will be soon hired. And so that way residents, agencies, anybody who wants to look at it, if they see any information needs to be edited, it can be continuously edited as needed. But also it being a link also makes it much more accessible across the community. So this is the employability section of the asset map. So as you can see, we've got the link to the agency on the left hand. Then we've got what the service is, the name of the service, and a very, very brief snapshot. So someone can look at it and say, okay, let's see, Dixon Home Employment Services, they have an incubator, they have literacy and basic skills. What is the incubator? Okay, then the next box is the target audience or eligibility. Am I eligible? Okay, you have to be 18 to 29 years old. You have to be an Ontario Works recipient. And what is the location?
Oh, really?
So this shows you the different services. Now, really important thing to note is that some of these agencies may be in different categories. So if we go to community employer, the next sheet, you'll see that there's some of these may also have been under employability, which means that they not only prioritize residents for jobs, but they also under employability offer services. So and the different services will be listed that they offer under that category. So if we go to work experience at the bottom, the next sheet, again, we'll see Art Heart Community Center, for instance. The information about the service that as it relates to work experience is on this particular page, but then under community employer, it's also listed because it prioritizes residents. So whatever you're interested in, you can go to that particular sheet and look at the information as it relates to that category. And the definition of each category is at the top. Okay, so this is the map. So again, you'll see the different colors and the different icons. These all relate to the different categories. So this kind of works along with the repository. So you can hover over it. You can see, for instance, you can click that one. You go ahead and click.
It'll bring up on the information about the service, and there's a website. If you click on another one, it'll bring up about the service and the website. You can also, because it's a Google map, you can also find directions from where you are. If you go back, if you click if you click on the side, Gail, next to employability, you'll see a check mark on the first category. If you remove that, because that's not relevant, then you will only see work experience, community employer. So you can click by category and see what resources are available. And again, this is editable. So as more businesses come to the area, as more, more jobs become hopefully available to residents, more agencies start becoming what we define as community employers, meaning they prioritize residents, they will be added to this list. So that is our sort of virtual map. It is available. It's an open link that anybody can use. And of course, this will be shared with everybody. Okay, so that is our asset map. As I say, it is dynamic. It is continuing to be updated, but currently the information was collected by many people, and it is up to date under those categories. Okay, and now this is the bulk of the information. So this is the data that we collected around the needs assessment. So the purpose around the needs assessment was to understand how residents are benefiting from the resources that are available to them, and what gaps remain to be addressed with regards to employment and entrepreneurial opportunities and access. So the needs assessment seeks to form a clearer picture of the needs of residents, form a descriptive picture of resident experiences and desires for the future of the neighborhood. And again, this is a snapshot of the main responses through interviews, focus groups, and an online survey. Okay, so before we get started in what the data showed us, this just very briefly to go over how we collected the data. So it set out to give residents an open platform to be able to express their voices to be heard. And this was conducted through a combination of online surveys and interviews, both one-on-one and focus groups. So we determined that the target number of responses for the online survey, which was going to be our main way of collecting data due to, of course, us living in a pandemic and being able to get the most number of responses that way, was based on market research sample sizing calculations, and the whole calculation will be in the report if you want to look at it. But this was based on the population of the neighborhood, which is approximately 10,000 residents. And so based on the calculation for market research sample sizing, we determined that we would like a target of 370 responses to the online survey. We got 396 respondents, so we were able to meet our goal, exceed our goal with respondents, again, through the help of people in this group and through the help of all of your networks. On top of that, the survey was also available in 9 community languages outside of English to be able to make sure that it was accessible. And it was also promoted. You can see some of the flyers, examples that were put on social media. They were put across polls, they were put in windows, they were put in businesses. We shared it across all the platforms that we could think of, RPTV and Regent radio, just everywhere that we can put it. And then on top of the online survey, we also conducted 29 interviews or focus groups. So there was, 29 residents that were interviewed through either focus groups or one-on-one interviews, as well as on top of that, an extra 13 agency staff one-on-one interviews. Okay, so we had nearly 430, more like 430 people altogether who responded and whose data made up what we're about to show you. So employment status, the top number of respondents at 22% were students, followed very closely by full-time employees at 19.2% of respondents. 17% were part-time employed, 16.2% were unemployed but actively looking for work. There were other categories as well that are lower percentages, such as retired, self-employed, or entrepreneur, unemployed and not able to work, or unemployed and not looking for work, or temporarily employed. For education level, the top respondents were high school diploma, GED, or equivalent, and that was 38.7% of respondents. Undergraduate university degree was the next highest at 27.8. College or apprenticeship at 16.8%, postgraduate at 8.6%, and then respondents who had not completed high school at 8.1%. Resident type, so we had 71.4% of our respondents lived in TCHC, and then market residents made up 27.3%. And then we had 0.3% who resided at Fred Victor and 0.6 who wished not to disclose. Okay, so then the ethnicity, 46.8% were either South or Southeast Asian, followed by 16.4% who were Black, African, or Caribbean, 15.2% who were Caucasian, 13.9% East Asian, and then smaller percentages were Latinx or South American, Arab, Middle Eastern, Indigenous, or multi-ethnic. Okay, we'll move on. So employment. So this is the questions that we asked. So one of the questions we wanted to know around what kinds of employment residents were looking for. So we first asked if residents wanted to work locally in the area. Nearly half of the respondents, 49.2%, said yes. 30.1% said maybe. Then we had 16.2% of respondents who weren't looking for work, so they didn't want to work in the area, or they were already working in the area. And 4.5% preferred to work outside the area. So nearly 80% of the 396 respondents either do or might want to work in Regent. So quite significant. As for the schedules that people were interested in, respondents could select more than one schedule. So the percentages add up to more than 100% because they might be interested in part-time or full-time or temporary. So it adds up to more than 100. But the top schedule that respondents were interested in was part-time, with just over half of the respondents, so 51.6% interested in a part-time schedule. Next was full-time at 38.4%. Then people who were not looking for work at all were just around a quarter of respondents at 25.9% of people. Following that, there was an interest in short-term or temporary employment. That was 20.6%. Apprenticeships or internships at 17.5%. 14.2% were interested in either on-call or relief jobs. And finally, 11.6% of our respondents were interested in finding work experience or volunteer opportunities. So we asked respondents to let us know what barriers they're experiencing in either finding or keeping employment. There was multiple, as you can see, and I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'm going to draw your attention to the ones in dark blue because we've highlighted any barriers that were brought up that were at least 15% of respondents faced. So of course, respondents could indicate that they faced multiple barriers, and so the percentages add up to more than 100%. But looking at the ones that are above 15%, the top employment barrier was 32.1%, and that was feeling that there was they had a lack of appropriate training. 27.2% don't know where or how to find jobs, and 23.9% face language and or literacy barriers. Next, we had people that were fearful of being judged when they applied for jobs, and that was at 18.1%. Then anxiety around looking for or finding jobs. That was significant as well at 17.9%. And finally, barriers around facing racism or Islamophobia at 16.2%. And again, as you can see, there are multiple other barriers. I won't get into all the details of each percentage, but of course, some of them mentioned transportation issue, lack of computer skills, or no computer to work from home right now, not having a cover letter or resume, Some people faced health issues that prevented them from working, caring responsibilities, accessibility, housing issues, losing RGI, losing social assistance or ODSP, access to interview clothes or safety clothes, and of course, recognition or lack of recognition of international credentials. Okay, so with regards to accessing support, we wanted to find out what kinds of supports people tried to access in order to be able to overcome some of these barriers. So first, we asked if people had accessed employment agencies and if they had looked for support outside of employment agencies, just anywhere to be able to overcome these barriers. So 40.9% actually said that they had not looked for any kinds of support to access, to overcome these barriers. And 71.9%, 71.9% may have looked for support in some places, but had not accessed the employment agencies. Okay, so of the respondents who had accessed employment agencies, we asked them, and not necessarily just in Regent Park, but employment agencies generally, we asked them if they could rank their experience in terms of how helpful it was for them on a personal level from 1 to 10, 1 being not at all helpful, 10 being very helpful. So the top rating was actually a 10 for those who had accessed the employment agencies, which was, about 20 something percent. And that was 29% of the respondents who had accessed employment agencies felt that they were very helpful for their needs. Most of the respondents from the interviews and who gave us the data, who gave us more details in the online survey, who did not access employment agencies, it was because they felt that their personal needs, their individual needs would not be served by the agencies, the employment agencies. And actually, employment agency staff did report as well that because of funding restrictions and targets that are set by their funders, Employment Ontario, their services are widely limited. There are services that anyone can access, but the vast majority of the services are very limited to individuals who do meet a strict criteria. And so there was a lot of agreement that, there is not a lot of flexibility with what can be offered because of those funding restrictions and targets. And so that there was also a lot of acknowledgement amongst staff, again, not just employment agency staff, but staff at different agencies across the community, that many, if not most of the staff at agencies across the community come from outside. So they don't often look like residents that they're trying to engage with. And that creates a very, very big barrier to trust. That was acknowledged not only by residents, but by the agency staff as well. And agencies did also report struggling to engage with community members who they felt would most benefit from the programs offered. Okay, so there's definite disconnect that's felt not only by residents, but also by the agency staff as well. So we also tried to figure out what would help. So we asked residents how they felt, how they would like to see employers be more flexible. And that would help, of course, with keeping or getting or keeping employment. So the top response in terms of how employers could be more flexible was around schedule. So flexible working hours. 75.9% of respondents said that if employers were more flexible with working hours, that would help. Next was flexible educational requirements, which was at 60.2% of respondents, followed by 39.5% saying that employers should be more flexible around religious accommodations. 36.4% wanted greater acceptance of disabilities or accommodations for people with varied abilities. And finally, 33.8% want flexibility around the acceptance of international credentials or experience. So the respondents to the needs assessment, again, both online and in interviews in the focus groups, were asked to share with us what they would like to see being offered that would help them either find or keep sustainable employment. There were many, many, many suggestions, and some were mentioned multiple times by multiple people. So the suggestions are being recommended by the community, by residents, on how employment can be made more sustainable within the area. And that's what I'm going to share with you now. So the first was around a job search group. So a job search group, which could act as a sort of support network for residents, where they could share experience, they could share suggestions around job searching. They could maybe bring in local employers who could share advice or give tips and advice. It could be a place where people sort of shared actual job postings and opportunities. There were many different opinions on how this kind of thing might work. Some said that it could be a Facebook group. Others said that they could meet in person or on Zoom every month. So the actual details of what a job search group might look like, there's no necessary one way that it could look. However, it was widely agreed that this would be something that would be beneficial. Many did feel that if there was a job search group, it would need to be a little bit more targeted. So one for youth, or one for adults, or one for people who are only looking for part-time, that kind of thing, or even by sector. So there were different ideas on what this could, the target of the groups, but there was wide agreement that this could be something that people would benefit from. The next is around workshops. So especially financial literacy workshop. This was mentioned by nearly everybody that I spoke to. These could be offered by agencies. They could even be offered by TCHC. But the financial literacy workshops and the workshops generally could focus around sort of different types of skills and knowledge that would help residents know their rights, know about opportunities, know how to plan, and know about financial health. So that way, even if they're unemployed or they're underemployed, they would still be able to feel like they have a sense of control or a sense of knowledge around how to handle their or manage their finances. A suggestion or a recommendation that was brought up by every single person was around systemic changes, the need for systemic changes, specifically around social assistance and rent geared to income. So it's obviously a big problem to tackle, but the current system creates barriers for people around employment, because unless you make not even a decent, a good wage at full-time hours that are permanent, your rent can go up if you have rent geared to income, or you can lose the financial support or subsidies for services that actually many people would not be able to afford if they did work and they weren't paid a lot. And they might lose subsidies because, of course, as we all know, Toronto is an extraordinarily expensive city to live in. Wages often just aren't sufficient, especially if you have multiple family members, or if you are in a lower salary job. So the way the current system is set up is it leads to a cycle of poverty, and it becomes difficult, if not impossible, for people who may want to work to actually get meaningful employment because of the way the system is set up. Another suggestion was around wraparound support. So especially around mental health. So for folks who are placed in jobs through the employment agencies, this was mentioned by some of the employers in the community who have hired through the employment agencies. Offering wraparound supports along with the actual job placement was recommended, because that would help to ensure that if a resident is hired and they're maybe facing multiple challenges in their home life, if they have that mental health support and that wraparound help outside of work, that would give them the ability to better be able to commit to their job, to commit to focus on the work, and know that they're getting support to address the other challenges that they may be facing outside of work. And this would also make it easier for some of the local employers to be able to hire residents through the agencies, and especially to be able to feel confident in hiring residents who may be facing multiple barriers. Flexibility. So this was all detailed on a previous slide, so I'll just go over it very briefly, but just wanted to reiterate the last slide, flexibility around helping to ensure that people are able to get jobs and keep jobs if employers are more flexible. So again, around accessibility for work hours, international credentials, religious accommodations, schedules, that kind of thing. So suggestions specifically made around employment opportunities in the area. These were made, again, first, more job opportunities generally in the community. So there needs to just be more jobs at all levels, but specifically there needs to be jobs that are not only entry level, but also middle and management roles. This was pretty much agreed upon by every person that I spoke to. There also needs to be more jobs that are specifically full-time and permanent, not just temporary contract jobs. And the jobs that are around right now are generally considered to be temporary or low waged. And so really looking at more jobs, but also more sustainable jobs that should be available. Linked to this, more businesses. So there are more businesses that should be in the area, according to respondents. And these businesses should, of course, employ residents. Businesses should be ones that bring in visitors to the neighborhood to spend money. And then residents can be the ones who are employed. So examples would be restaurants or entertainment venues. Those were ones that were brought up in terms of the kinds of businesses that would really help to bring in more customers. You bring in more customers, you have more jobs available for the community. Another recommendation that was widely suggested was that jobs going in the area must prioritize residents first. So much like within the public sector, you know, when you have like a unionized job and there's an internal post and it goes internally to applicants before going to external applicants, a similar model, but within the neighborhood, where all jobs that are going within the community must first be offered to resident applicants. And then only if, you know, there's not a good applicant who meets the criteria, then it could be opened up to non-resident applicants. This was widely suggested as something that needs to happen in the community. This is because residents know the community best. They'd therefore be able to be the best in terms of serving other community members, or especially visitors to the area. And so it was also brought up that this prioritizing residents for jobs is something that should be part of the ongoing negotiations with the new developer, Tridel. Audits. So audits, employment audits, were also suggested as a way to hold businesses and agencies in the area accountable. So around their hiring. So we know that a lot of agencies say that they make jobs for the community or they prioritize residents for jobs, but there's no real data to know how accurate this is. So an employment audit would therefore mean that we would find out every single staff member within the businesses and the agencies, not only if they're a resident and what their job is, but what level of position they're in. So it could be that one particular agency does in fact hire a lot of residents, but the residents are only entry level. How many are management? How many are middle level? So an audit is a good way to actually get an accurate picture and know how to actually target this. Finally, around opportunities, there was a suggestion around relationship building between the EED as well as employers in the area. So this would help to get a clearer picture on who's being hired and why. So for instance, when a job goes out, there's a bunch of applicants, they get shortlisted, and then they get interviewed, they get hired, someone gets hired. The EED could work with the employers to figure out who from the area applied for these jobs and who got shortlisted and who got interviewed and who got hired. Why? And is it then they could properly target where the divide is, where the disconnect is. Is it actually that we're not getting good applicants from the area, in which case maybe we need to focus that attention on supporting people with applications or supporting people in terms of getting, their credentials or whatever it is? Or is it actually that the business or the agency needs to alter their hiring practices? So to get that clearer picture, anytime a job goes out, the resumes or the applications could be anonymized, shared with the EED, and they can actually work on figuring out where that disconnect is, who's applying, who's getting it, and why. Youth and community specific suggestions. So pretty much every young person that I spoke to, young person defined as under 25, one thought that there would be a really, really good opportunity to have some sort of conference. And this could happen even before the pandemic's over. Many of them said, listen, we go to school on Zoom, do it on Zoom. You don't have to wait for a real in-person conference, but we could do one in person too. So this would be an opportunity to bring together people who grew up in the neighborhood, who have done well in their careers in different sectors, who could then come in, speak, share their journeys with the youth on how they did it, what they did, how they got where they got, what suggestions they have to motivate young people, in terms of there's a lot of concern of young people that there's a stigma. There's still a stigma coming from the area. And so there's not a lot of jobs in the area, and a lot of people outside the area consider us, we're from Regent, we're not going to be good employees. And so bringing in that motivation piece, that conference, to really see how others did it, for that motivation and for the sort of the tips, was something that pretty much every single young person I spoke to wanted. Workshops also were mentioned, again, financial literacy workshops, but specific for young people. So that way that if these were sort of geared towards youth, then it would teach them the basics around taxes, around how to finance school if they decide to pursue post-secondary, around the importance of savings and how to invest, stuff that would set them up for financial freedom, or at least some sort of stability that you just don't learn at school. And these could be offered through the schools, through the high schools, in partnership with some of the agencies in the area. Mentorship opportunities were also brought up as a chance to give youth a chance to learn from professionals within their fields that they may be interested in possibly going into. So, they could learn about the sector, they could hear about opportunities within the sector or in the industry that may come up, what skills are needed, again, as well as building their confidence around working in the field. So especially for young people who may be considering, like, who are finishing high school, not sure whether to pursue post-secondary, or they do want to pursue post-secondary, they just don't know which industry. This is something that if there was a mentorship, they could really work with somebody within a particular sector, figure out if that's for them before actually pursuing it. Or if they're already studying it, they could learn from that mentor in terms of how to actually get into the field after studying. Youth also requested having job trials. So job trials would be an opportunity where they could test out a job for a few weeks to see if it's a good fit for them. So this would be especially helpful for the youth who are deciding what they want to pursue in post-secondary education. But this actually could be helpful for youth who aren't necessarily sure what kinds of jobs that they might like or be good at before applying, even if they don't want to go to post-secondary. So while this was brought up by youth who were interested in post-secondary, this is actually could be something available within the trades, within different sectors, for young people, even those who don't want to go to college or university, but they still don't know what kinds of jobs that not only they want, but that they would be good at. So a 2 to 4 week trial within a business or within an agency where they could test it out, get their feet wet, so to speak, and figure out, is this something I want to pursue long term? Shifting gears a little away from youth and into sort of the community engagement generally, a peace garden. So while this Doesn't sound like it's directly related to employment. I will show how it is in a moment. So this was brought up as an opportunity that would serve multiple purposes within the community. First, it would memorialize the lives that have been lost to violence in the area, both before the rewrite and since. It would commemorate the injustices that many have endured. It would show the parents of lost children that they've not been forgotten. It would recognize the history and give new residents and visitors a place to stop, to read, to learn. It would simultaneously, from an employment perspective, provide a job opportunity for maintenance, a maintenance person or a groundskeeper. It could be, a temporary, or it could just be temporary or part-time job for a young person, but it could be, a weekly or a monthly job that somebody could take on to ensure that it's kept maintained. Finally, bridging the gap within the community. So again, it's not directly related, but it's quite indirectly related, and it is related. Every single person that I spoke to mentioned that there is a palpable divide between the so-called newcomers, so the market residents, and TCH residents. Regent Park used to be a very tight-knit community. This divide has impacted that feeling of closeness, of community, of togetherness, of belonging. So again, this is something that's being felt by both market residents and TCHC residents. And everybody again spoke about this. So this was brought up, in fact, even by some of the agency staff, because there are certain events that may happen within the community, or there are certain opportunities where there's not much mingling or interaction between TCH and newcomers. And so it's often felt that sometimes if there's an opportunity that's just sort of a community event, that mingling, when it's not there, it ends up kind of creating these silos and this divide. So how does this relate to employment? Well, the thought is that if there's effort put into bridging that gap, really fostering those relationships, then it can be built upon down the line. There could be possible employment related opportunities. So it could bring up mentorships, events, workshops. But when we're having people there were some people that even said, I will not go to this. I know there's events going, but if I know that there's somebody from market, or if I know there's somebody from TCH, I don't feel comfortable going. And so when that gap is there, it's just it continues to lead to this divide. And that actually has impacted some of the young people who told me that they very much felt that even within the community, they might not sort of be good enough. If there's jobs going that prioritize residents, they might not have the same experience or background and be able to compete with market residents. There's just that divide and that misunderstanding. And so bridging that gap would not only have an impact, working on bridging that gap would not only have an impact from a community perspective, but also potentially down the line around employment related opportunities. Some quotes. So these are some of the quotes that were shared from the focus groups and interviews. I just picked out a couple. There's going to be more in the final report. So the first was, we are given the opportunity to dream, but not the means to make those dreams a reality. When there is no opportunity, people fall through the gaps. If these companies are profiting off of us, they should at least give us the opportunity to learn from them and a chance to work there. You can't optimize people and profit at the same time. Okay, finally, we're just going to go over entrepreneurship. So respondents who wish to be entrepreneurs, let us know what types of businesses that they wish to start. Some were interested in multiple types of businesses. So again, the percentages add up to more than 100. 36% were interested in food or catering services. 31% in providing some sort of service. So that could be beauty, it could be a cleaning service, as other kinds of professional services. Following that, 28.9% were interested in a retail shop or selling goods. Nonprofit or charity was 27.2% of respondents who were interested. And then 20.7% were interested in starting a social enterprise. And finally, 16.5% were interested in becoming a freelance consultant. With regards to those that wish to be entrepreneurs, respondents let us know which supports they would like or they would require in order to be able to start a business, to actually go from wanting to be an entrepreneur to becoming an entrepreneur. So the supports that they need, 100% of respondents said that they would need support for business taxes. Following that, the next highest response rate was financial support to actually be able to start up. That was 70.3%. Then support for business idea development at 54.6%. That was followed closely by subsidized retail space at 54.2%. Hiring and HR support at just over half of respondents at 50.2%. Branding and promotional support was also nearly half at 49.4%. And then web and social media support, 43.4%, followed by feasibility study at 37.8%, office and meeting space at 37.7%, and finally, organizing job fairs, which was 28.1% of respondents said that they would need that for to help them start their business. So respondents also shared what barriers they face with regards to starting a business or growing as an entrepreneur. The top barrier that was faced by over half of respondents at 55.7% was encountering lack of startup experience. So following that was access to startup capital. So like we saw on the last slide. COVID-related barriers were 45.9%, 37.6% business registration and paperwork, 24.9% faced barriers around finding and keeping customers. Lack of technology was 23.3%. Lack of meeting space, 21%. And finally, being able to know how to find and hire employees, 19.4%. We're nearly there. So suggestions around entrepreneurship. So these were the recommendations similar to the employment-related ones, but specifically suggested by entrepreneurs, specifically around entrepreneurship. So first, community benefits. So there was a suggestion that a portion of the agreement needed to be dedicated specifically to entrepreneurial development, support, and opportunities. So this could include grants. This could include training. This could include a space for entrepreneurs to be able to work in. The next idea shared, and this was shared by every single entrepreneur that I spoke to in an interview. Some form of mentorship program. Now, again, there was different ideas in terms of the details of what this could look like, depending, of course, on people's needs, but a program that is a mentorship opportunity that matches entrepreneurs at different stages of their journey with a mentor. This would be beneficial because, okay, so the different ways that people wanted it to look like, it could either, instead of just being like a random mentor who's an entrepreneur with a random mentee, it could be specific to sector. It could be specific to what specific skill you need mentorship on. So I could be paired, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a budding entrepreneur, I'm a mentee, my mentor would be a successful entrepreneur who I need communication support. We would be paired for X amount of time until they're able to help me with my communications need. Then that mentorship pairing would be done. They could move on to the next mentee. I now need support with taxes. I would then be paired with a mentor who is an entrepreneur who works around taxes specifically. So it would be by specific individual need, not just you're an entrepreneur, you want to be an entrepreneur, let's link you up. So more specifically. Alternatively, it could just be industry specific. So Ayesha wants to start a business in retail goods. We will put her in touch with a mentor who does retail, not just here's a mentor who's any kind of entrepreneur, here's a mentee, let's pair them. So being more specific and strategic around those partnerships. But a mentorship program, again, suggested by every single entrepreneur. Affordable space. So again, every single entrepreneur in the interviews did mention there's a need for affordable space. It didn't matter what level they were at in terms of their entrepreneurial journey. Affordable space in the area is a top need. Depending on the type of business, of course, the kind of space required differs, which of course makes it slightly more complicated, but retail space, a kitchen or cooking space, meeting and office space. There was also a mention of needing mailing address, a neutral mailing address for businesses, for business cards and websites. And because there was a feeling that it might not be professional to use a building because someone might Google you, they see that you're in a building. There was some concern around there could be a stigma associated if somebody is using their address and it's a TCHC building. And so there was just a lot of concern around mailing addresses generally, and that needed to be addressed for professional purposes. We also asked respondents both in the survey and in the interviews about whether or not a business hub would be something that they would benefit from and that they would like to see in the area. 84.4% of the online respondents said that yes, this was something that they would be interested in, and every single entrepreneur that I interviewed said absolutely yes. What it should look like and like the specifics around what the program could actually look like. Of course, there were different ideas floated by different people, but again, general idea that it would be a mixed space where entrepreneurs, small businesses could work from or could sell from. So it could be a mix of services, it could be a mix of selling goods, but there's also suggestion that the mentorship program should actually be part of the business hub. So it should be an affordable space, and there can be collaboration between the different entrepreneurs within the business hub. Again, what stage within their entrepreneurial journey that member should be at to be able to get access to it. This differed, the opinions differed from person to person. Whether or not this should be only available to residents, like residents to be entrepreneurs within the business hub, this also differed. But one thing that was mentioned was that in order to be able to bring customers in, there needed to be visibility, and therefore it had to be a space that was accessible, but also most likely street visible and on the first floor. So that way passersby, visitors, as well as community members who don't know about it would not only see it, but also want to stop by easily and enter it. So finally, recommendations to the SDP and specifically to the EED were brought up as a group. These recommendations came from current, from previous, and from non-members of the SDP and of its various working groups. So these are important to take on board as the group works towards purposefully serving the community and creating that trust for the work of this data that's being collected to be able to actually respond to it. So the first recommendation was around onboarding new members. So there was a sense that many of the people who joined the group aren't quite aware of the background, of the history, and even of the purpose of the group. So not, some onboarding around its organization. So while the mandate of the group is read at the beginning of each member, a more robust onboarding of new joiners to really give a sense of the actual purpose, what we're working on currently, and what who's on it, all that kind of stuff through an actual onboarding process. So people can just not only feel more welcomed, but also know their place in it, know what they can contribute, and also feel that they're getting into something that they can actually commit to and know what it is that they are possibly committing to. Linked to that, setting clear expectations and roles for all members. So this is especially the case for agency staff who attend, because many of them are actually expected to join the group as part of their jobs within the agencies. but don't always know what their particular role should be or how they can individually or as an agency actually support the mandate of the group, what they can do, why they are here, other than being told you need to join the group, um, and sort of what that contribution can be. So sometimes, so being more specific around roles and expectations around new and ongoing members was suggested. The name of the working group, so the EED, Employment and Economic Development, many felt that this was an ambiguous term. They didn't really understand what it means, what the purpose is. Employment is maybe a little bit more specific than economic development, but the name of the group was felt to be not particularly clear. Diversity. So there is quite a lot of concern, again, by current, previous, and non-members around, this isn't just around the EED, it's around all of the SDP working groups. There's concern brought up that there was a select number of residents who are very vocal and who are very involved, but that there can be a feeling that they overpower the groups. Other residents felt that sometimes there's no point in joining as their voices will be drowned out or ignored. And so when I say more diverse resident involvement, that doesn't mean necessarily demographically diverse, but it means trying to really focus on who is on what groups and why. There was a lot of concern around hiring practices. So hiring practices generally for all businesses and agencies, but also around SDP groups and transparent hiring practices when there are jobs going within the working groups. So there is unfortunately a belief that nepotism is rife in hiring within the area and around not only again with the businesses, but also within the groups. And that jobs are being created for people, that there is a lot of self-interest, and there's a major lack of trust within hiring within the area and again within the group as well. So whether this is actually true, whether it is just perceived to be true, it is still obviously a big concern and something that needs to be taken into account around hiring practices moving forward. And finally, every single person that was spoken to said there needs to be a more centralized spot for employment related opportunities. So that includes job postings, that includes work experience opportunities, training, upskilling. A centralized spot would be needed, again, not only for jobs through businesses and through agencies, but also through the grassroots groups, through the employment agencies, through the developer. Everybody within the community should know about the centralized spot that they can go to see anything that's employment related, that they can go to learn about the opportunities. It would, of course, there would have to be a couple of different channels because not everybody is able to access a computer or a website, but having these specific channels where everybody knows this is where I post, this is where I go to learn every week or every few days what's going on with regards to employment in the area.
forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out all of our social media platforms. For more information, check out our website.